last time people saw this car, Johnny, it had no rocker skin and no lower quarter repairs done to it. You kind of want to go through the process and give people an understanding what it is they're looking at.
Yes, so we've got, as you can see here, there's a seam here, and there's a seam here. Both of these pieces were replaced. They're brand new. Prepped them for paint. As you can see, a lot of the metal work that we do here is ground down like this, so we can get body filler primers to stick to it.
You want to talk about the challenges that happened with the upper section of that quarter panel? I don't know if we expressed it on the last video about this.
Yeah, that was really a funky one. What happened is this car was involved in a collision. This entire quarter panel was replaced, and what happened is whoever replaced it last time, what they did is they cut the old quarter panel just about right here. I have no idea where they replaced it back here. But what happened is that this quarter panel does these steps right all the way up to the quarter window flange, and this is pinch welded here from the factory. So when we replace these kinds of parts here, this rusts out quite often on a lot of these GTVs, so we do a lot of work along here. But I had never seen one that had 3 layers of metal. What was going on is they took this new quarter panel, they welded it on top of the old quarter panel, but they only left about this much of the section. So they cut the old quarter panel somewhere about right here. And what was happening is this door line wasn't lining up with the quarter panel. This door line here, this door line here, and these are really, really important because you can't move these at all. You can kind of adjust these by blocking down the paint a certain way, but you can't do very much about it. This was about 1/4 inch too high. And we were trying to figure out what was going on. So what I had to do is I had to bust loose all the welds from the door jamb along here. Busted loose all those welds. Busted the welds loose all the way up to about right here. Cut the piece of quarter panel that belongs to the old quarter panel out, but to do that I had to bust all the welds loose from this quarter panel so that we could pull the quarter panel out far enough so I could get tools in there to take both the pieces of metal from the inner structure of the car and the old quarter panel and bust those welds together so I could pull the piece out. After that was done, what was going on is this was still too high. So what we had to do is we had to take some ratchet straps and a couple other ways of pulling this quarter panel down so that these body lines would line up again, because this body line, like I had said, everything here was about 1/4 inch too high. There's nothing we could do with adjusting the hinges because that would ruin this line and this gap and this gap and then this gap. So absolutely this quarter panel had to come down, which was a lot of work. Now by doing that, what it did is it caused this door gap right here between the quarter panel and the door to widen way down here. So I had to fill this door gap back up with weld, ground it down, made it nice, made sure that everything had a uniform fit all the way down that quarter panel. Not easy stuff. It took, days to get done, but it's done now. Now, as you can see, we have the quarter sections in and the lower sections of the fender in. They're spot welded here as well as seam welded here. The same with this. We've got the rocker skin. I had to make sure that the door gaps between everything fits really nice. So I have to pull the door off, mock the piece, tack it into place, put the door back on, mock everything, weld it up into place, stress the welds, pull the door off, and then I had to hammer this flange that's on the inside of this rocker in like this so I could weld the back side of it, put the door back on, make sure that everything lines up nicely, and we're good to go. So I'm on the process of doing the exact same thing on the other side.
Well, let's go look at it.
And as you can see here, we've got the middle rocker in. We've got our pieces that are going to be covered up, treated with Por 15. What it is, it's Por 15 is a rust converter. It's kind of like a primer It seals in the metal because it chemically bonds to the metal. It's great stuff for restoration. We use it all the time. So we've got our fender replacement pieces. That's going to fit like so. And this is going to fit like so. But before I can do any of that stuff, what happens is, as the car is driving down the road, it gets moisture trapped between the flanges of the inner structure of the car and the outer structure of the car, the quarter panel. So as you can see, this flange bends over, and the quarter panel does as well, and it's spot welded all the way along this inner fender here. So that's what it's for. Now, they rust out all the time. You can see this here. These are the pieces that I cut out because I had to fabricate new ones. If you can imagine this, following the contour of this, I hammered it out flat so I could make it, so I could use it as a stencil for the new pieces. You can see how much rust there is right here. So with the quarter panel fitting around it and being welded up to it, obviously I can't weld new steel to rusted metal, so I had to cut it out and fabricate new pieces. So these are the new pieces that I'm fabricating. So it's a lot of tedious work that we have to do before we actually weld the pieces in, because you obviously need a good solid base foundation to be able to weld the rocker skin and quarter panels up to it. So I've got 20 gauge, and as you can see, it's ground down and prepped for paint so that later on, when everything is said and done and welded up into place, we don't have to come back here and do these tedious little hard to sand places. It's really hard to prep, so we prep everything beforehand. So as you can see, I'm mocking it up, fitting it. I'm taking it to the shrinker stretcher to make this curve. I'll weld these pieces in, and then I'll take the rocker skin, the quarter panel rocker skin, prep that, mock it up a few times, make sure everything lines up with the actual rocker skin, the outer rocker skin. Make sure everything fits and lines up with the door. We have to mount the door back on here to make sure that we've got a good door gap. And that's what I got going on. So as soon as these pieces are nice and trimmed exactly where I want them, I'll TIG weld them together, and I'll be ready for the rest of it.
Alright, so Johnny is currently taking care of all the lower end stuff that's going on with this car, meaning, you know, typical rough stuff like, well, the front end valance and the rockers, and there are some interesting trunk issues that we'll show you in a minute. But this is the replacement front valance section that we got in for this car. What is not uncommon for the GTs and the Supers, because they both have the same radiator core support challenges, is how the sway bar mounts up in here. As you saw in the photos that are in the beginning of this video, there's a lot of compromised issues up in here. Whether you have rust in the lower valance or not, I would suggest that if you have any GTV, regardless of what year it is, drop that sway bar out. It's not under pressure at this point. If you were just to get underneath it, take it from the actual mounts and drop it down. Inspect that area right where the mounting goes. Be careful though. Pay attention to the stress of those bolts, because oftentimes bolts break right off in the mount system because there's always a lot of rust that builds up in these areas. So anyway, so check that area out and make sure that those are still, you know, fairly intact. And if you can, buy yourself a rattle can of cavity wax or rust preventer. It's basically like a aerosol wax, if you will. And see if you can't find a place to maybe put a little hole with a drill and saturate the entire area in there on both sides. The reason you want to do that is because the wax coats that surface. Whether it's already rusted or not is not important. What is important is that you keep oxygen off of the surface. And that wax material, that's exactly what it does. It displaces oxygen from the surface. If you don't have oxygen, you can't have rust exist. Just a little thing you should know. But anyway, all GTVs, regardless of what year they are, this area tends to be pretty compromised. So if you are in the middle of doing your winter maintenance and what have you on yours, you might want to thoroughly inspect this, especially if you're one of those people who want to do an upsized front bar. The bigger the bar, the more stress this area is going to see, and we have seen an awful lot of these get ripped out right here, okay? And those upsized bars don't typically really help that problem. Next thing we're going to show you is something that was going on the rear end of this car. I would like to say this is rare, but it's not. It's usually pretty well masked and hidden, but there is some interesting damage that happened back there, and it's pretty commonplace.
So earlier Darren explained how the mounting area of the sway bar gets rusted out. This is what that panel looks like. This is the lower valance panel that I cut out. You can see how these weep holes are designed to allow water to drain out of that area. But what happens is that they get clogged up, moisture collects and builds up, and then you get rust. So if you're looking to buy a GTV, one thing that you should definitely inspect are the resistance welds in the back valance. Now, what's going to happen is that they're going to be covered up by the rear bumper, but you should check that there should be about 24 to 31 resistant welds on the back side of this. So if you're buying a car, make sure you check this area that they're still here. If they're not here, that means that there's been some body work done to this car, which usually means that this car has been rear-ended somehow. So you should definitely do some extra inspection inside the trunk and make sure that there's no rust issues, because we've seen a lot of cars come through here that have rust issues, and this is one of them. And the reason why this is one of them is because the quarter panel got hit. The repair wasn't done very well and it rusted out, and actually there was access for moisture to go into the trunk because that problem didn't get assessed. Okay, so you guys have the still shots of all the seam sealer that was back here. You guys have seen the still shots of what this floor pan looked like before it was cut out due to that side collision on the quarter panel. You guys have seen the still shots of me making the frame behind this, underneath it, to give it that nice contour and to make sure that this thing is stable and not flopping around all over the place with the vibrations of the car driving down the road. So now what we have is we've recreated everything from the factory as best as we could. Now it looks pretty good now. You can't tell after we get some seam sealer back here. You won't be able to tell that this has ever been replaced, but if you see an excessive amount of seam sealer back here, there's a problem. Now these were seam sealed from the factory because this is just floating. This isn't welded to the quarter panel. So Alfa loaded this area with a good amount of seam sealer, but not an excessive amount. So if you see an excessive amount, you know that there's a problem. So you saw so you noticed how Darren explained earlier how the mounting parts of earlier Darren